Will hopefully be a quick informative video on Octane and why it's important. And for this video I'm going to use my 2020 Silverado, but the strategy is actually the same amongst all GM vehicles. Now, when you come over here to Octane, you see we have two tables. Just a quick rundown, this is your main spark table before any modifiers, and here across the top you see the RPM, and then you see a grams per second per cylinder breakdown over on the side. What this means is when you make a pull in one of these vehicles, you go wide open throttle, it's going to sweep through here. Okay, now this is your high octane, so let's take a random, let's say most of these shift about 5600, so we're going to say 5600 at around 7200 RPM. At that point you're at 18 degrees of timing. Now on a stock vehicle you're going to be in here. You've lost 10 degrees of ignition timing. Okay, so how does the computer go between these? Well, if you go under the retard tab here, what you will notice, you have a few things: max step, max delta, amount, how much timing it can pull at once, which also has modifiers. But some of the big things to look at is when you come down here, you have a learn up and a learn down. So learn up is defined as learn factor is incremented, moved towards low octane by this amount if knock is detected, and that threshold is 3 degrees of knock. Alright, so here's your numbers. You don't necessarily have to know what these are. This is just a multiplier. Okay, now here's the thing. Here's your learn down. So your learn down is learn factor is decremented, moved towards high octane by this amount if no knock is detected. Wait a minute, so here's this one, and here's this one. Okay, so what I want you to realize is that anytime you get into any sort of knock or ping, the computer is going to move very rapidly towards low octane and very slowly towards high octane. And that's how these vehicles are just designed. In fact, most of the older vehicles are, unless you reset the computer, are very prone not to go to the high octane. So when you start getting knock, it will start moving towards this 10 degrees less ignition timing. That's why a lot of times you can take two trucks that are otherwise identical and one feels way faster than the other. Now, to be fair, sometimes these trucks will not move off high octane just because you put 87 in them. However, you pull a trailer, it gets hot, you give it a bunch of wide open throttle, any number of things, and they will start to transition to the low octane table. They will start to pick up knock. My truck completely stayed in the high octane table on the dyno. The dyno roller is 2,600 pounds. The truck is 4,800 pounds. It is twice the weight. Of course it's not going to get into knock on the dyno. There's not enough load. However, on the street, there absolutely can be. And when that happens, it will transition to the low octane and power will fall off. So the next thing I'm going to show you, this is a car that came in. We did a cam. It was stock exhaust, stock intake, stock, etc. Now what you'll notice is that this car is running, you watch this white line, this red line is knock. So this is an incident we had on the dyno where it was trying to run 21 degrees of timing and it got in a knock and boom, it falls off. So what does that affect on power when you get into knock? Well, this, okay, that is the fall off from getting knock and ping. Now, that's probably roughly a 20 horsepower, 15 horsepower drop. Now your modifications will factor in a lot on how much power you lose. So let's take the same car and the customer came back and voila, they did some exhaust, freed up the exhaust, did some air intake. They came back and same thing, we're getting in a knock. Okay, so it's a little less aggressive timing on this one, but it's still getting in a knock and still pulling the knock out. So let's take a look at what that looks like with some exhaust modification. A lot less susceptible to the knock. You still have a power loss, you can still see the dip, however, it's nowhere near as bad. Okay, so now we know what low octane does. What happens when you take the same vehicle and fill it with a high octane fuel? In this example, we use some VP additive. It is supposed to raise the octane around 7 points, which would take the 87 and put it just about 93 in this case with the amount of fuel that was provided. So that should make it premium fuel. When we do that, okay, and remember these numbers, we're looking at 20 degrees and we're fighting with knock, On 87, it's almost impossible. This is 2 pulls later after adding VP additive. 24, 28. We did get some little dribbles, okay? 28 degrees. Now, what does that do to the power? Well, not quite as much as you would think, if we're being honest. So let's go ahead and clear that. Now, you definitely make more power, but you don't make that much more power. We've got 11 foot-pounds of torque. That's this number up here. So it definitely picked up torque in the mid-range, and it definitely didn't lose power here. Peak to peak, you're losing about 10, 15 horsepower right there. But your peak number's not actually that different. We gained about 6 horsepower, just under 6 horsepower. That's not that much, right? But remember that number about 3 degrees of timing will move you towards low octane? Now here, you can see this little number. It didn't quite hit 3 there, but it hit 4 there, and it hit 3.6 there. So what's the point of that? Well, in this specific example, in one dyno pull, this car has started to migrate towards the low octane table already. So yeah, it only made 472 horsepower. However, the very next pull, it would have pulled more ignition timing and made less horsepower. And the pull after that, if it exceeded the 3-point knock threshold, would have reduced the timing table further until it got away from the knock. It is a protective program that GM uses. However, they were very poor, and I'll call GM out on this, they were very poor on making it go the other way. Ford especially has taken advantage of that, and Dodge to a lesser extent. Ford will add ignition timing up to certain parameters in the table, certain limits, if there's not enough noise coming from the knock sensors, if you're below certain thresholds. So Ford will add timing. You could put, in theory, a certain amount of race gas or something better in a Ford F-150 or Mustang, Coyote car, 2011 and up, and it will add its own ignition timing. Now, there's tables that control how much and where it can do it, and generally up top they won't add any, but on the bottom they will definitely add ignition timing. It's one of the reasons why Coyotes tend to run so well. So, here's your information. Use it if you want, but I encourage you, if you're a performance enthusiast, to run premium. Just because your label doesn't say you need it doesn't mean that your truck or vehicle or car won't benefit from it. It absolutely will. Again, in my case, on the dyno we had 0 knock, and the truck could have ran 100 pulls on the dyno with 0 knock and stayed in high octane. But I promise you, the first time I pulled a trailer on 87 octane, the first time I pulled a heavy load, the first time I gapped a full in the lane next to me and ran it through a bunch of gears and put a lot of heat in the engine, it absolutely would have started to show knock, which would have triggered the transition to the low octane. Now, the newer trucks would eventually go back up, but as you saw, that rate is on a magnitude lower than the rate at which it'll go down. So, at the end of the day, as a consumer, you have to decide if this is worth it. But on the other hand, this customer is making more power, more smoothly, and with less detonation affecting the engine. My recommendation is, if you're an enthusiast, you want your engine to last as long as possible and you want to go out and play, that you run the high octane fuel. On low octane fuel, and especially if you get bad low octane fuel, it's hard to keep them off the knock sensor. We have to absolutely kill the horsepower and kill the timing to keep them 100% off the knock sensors. And then you lose a lot of benefit of the tune, because honestly, adding ignition timing is often one of the number one ways that we add power. The other one being taking excess fuel out, or in some cases adding fuel in. So, up to you as a consumer, but if you come to my shop and you want to make the most power possible, put premium in. Or Put E85 in. That's a whole nother subject, but I promise you, if you have a flex fuel vehicle, we're going to make more power on E85. It might be 3 horsepower, it might be 20, it might be 30. If you're supercharged, it's 10%, but we will make more power, and we will do it cleaner.